Hi folks, thanks for joining me. Welcome back to the Spicule vlog. We're here today to take a look at Juju Charms and specifically Kubernetes Charms and what they are, how they can help your business, how you can deploy software easier, quicker, more efficiently, and also crucially share knowledge across both your own business and others to try and make the DevOps life cycle easier for everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Tom Barber. I've been running Spicule for a number of years, where we deal with scalable data platforms. One of the things that we do that is crucial is obviously deploying software both on the cloud directly, but also these days an awful lot of stuff comes in Docker containers, or the client wants stuff to be able to deploy into Docker. The cool thing these days is Kubernetes. So taking those containers and be able to deploy them quickly and efficiently is something that's key for us. One of the problems that we've had over the years is Kubernetes deployments are YAML and an interesting array of YAML at that. And then if you want to go for something that's a bit more involved, it involves a couple of different pods, a couple of connections, network interfaces, that type of thing, then you've got to look at something like Helm. Helm is cool. Helm certainly fits a lot of people's requirements, but it still requires YAML, configuration specs, and obviously, it can be quite a daunting task to get up and running. One of the things that we've found using Juju is it's very easy to understand what's going on. You've got a command line interface, you use very simple commands to be able to deploy the stuff that you want to be able to deploy. Being able to leverage that both from the cloud, but also in Kubernetes deployments themselves can make life a whole lot easier because you can deploy stuff without having to think about what the command is or write a YAML script to be able to do it. It's quick, it's simple, you just get it done. So we're going to take a look at one of them, like an example charm, and a charm is an encapsulation of a piece of software. In our case, it's going to be a piece of software that we write. It's called Seku. And we're going to deploy that into a Kubernetes cluster just to demonstrate a very simple way of being able to deploy this software. Of course, what we will do in a future vlog is take this forward and show how you can join different databases together. You can join different web servers, without having to craft an extra piece of YAML or share some knowledge. Juju has this amazing property called relations, that allows you to send metadata between different applications. And this also works in a containerized environment where you're passing in specific environment variables or writing a configuration file to a container or something along those lines. Without further ado, we're first going to take a look at the website for those of you who haven't been there before. It's changed recently. It's now called jazz.ai. This is sort of the hosted cloud version, but you can see the Charm store where all these pieces of software live, and get a good feel for what's available already. One of the things I should mention as well is you can combine both cloud-based Charm deployments and Kubernetes Charm deployments so that if you've got a database that lives in AWS or Azure or GCE, and you want to be able to connect it to a Kubernetes container, you can do exactly that. And Juju understands the network topology, understands the firewall rules, all that type of stuff, and will join these pieces of software together, allowing you to build out a very complex deployment environment with just a few simple commands. So here we are on jazz.ai. The website itself has a good explanation about what's going on, what the software does, how it works, all that type of stuff. It's not Kubernetes specific yet, but you can still find the same bits and pieces that we'll be working on. But obviously it shows you everything that's in the Charm store. So there's already a lot of software there. There's already a lot of bits and pieces that people already want to use. So, when we end up on the landing page, you'll find some quick and easy ways to demonstrate how to get going. It's Juju at your command, and it will show you how to add clouds, add credentials. Of course, the documentation is extensive for this stuff. It's very quick and easy to get going. It gives you a good understanding about, how to deploy bundles, what the models look like, all that type of stuff. And then back at the top, of course, we've got the Charm store. So if I go and click on the store link. So the jazz.ai store at the top level will show you some of the sort of more promoted charms. But there's all sorts in there. So if I wanted to be able to deploy a a Spark cluster, I can type Spark. It will show me a bunch of charms and a bunch of bundles. You see these two at the top, they're bundles because they've got more than one charm associated with it. And a bundle is just a collection of different pieces of software that are joined together so they understand how to deploy into a network topology. So if I want to do Spark processing, this isn't Kubernetes, so we'll get into that in a bit. But at the moment, if I wanted to do Spark processing, I can look at the bundle. I can see that it's got some monitoring stuff there for me. It's got my Spark charm, and then it's got some syslog forwarders and Zookeeper to obviously keep everything managed. And you can see the lines that are connected together on these bundles. They are the relations, and the relations are the bits and pieces that configure the software so that your Spark instance knows the IP addresses of your Zookeeper core and that type of stuff. So it's very succinct. It's very easy to understand at a glance what software relies on other software when you're deploying these bits and pieces into the cloud. Further down the README, there's a whole bunch of stuff about deploying this stuff. So, if you want to deploy this one, for instance, you've got Juju deploy Spark processing. If you do that, it will spin up all the instances that you need. It will create all the servers if you're hooked up to AWS, that type of thing. And it's very easy to get up and going. And then you can watch it deploy using Juju status. Okay, so we're now going to deploy or have a look at the Seku charm. And the reason being, it's very simple, it's very easy to understand, hopefully, and will give you a good idea about how to get up and running, deploying your own software into the charm store, and then obviously on into your own Kubernetes deployments. So I'm in the store here, and if I type in Seku, of course, you can see quite a few bits and pieces come back. There's nothing obviously there until I scroll down to the bottom that shows that I'm looking for something that's Kubernetes specific. Now, Kubernetes charms are different to all the cloud charms. So if you see something that's for Bionic or Xenial or whatever, it's not going to work in Kubernetes. But if you find something that's got Kubernetes tag next to it, of course, it's designed for deployment into a Kubernetes environment. So if I click on the charm, currently, as you can see, I haven't actually updated the README, so it doesn't tell you very much. But the charm itself is there, and you can see the resource down the side, relations that are available for it, and then a whole bunch of files that have been set up to deploy Seku to Kubernetes. Now, charms that we write these days are called reactive charms. They've got a special language that's associated with them that's based largely on Python with a couple of tweaks and bits and pieces, but makes it easy to write the deployment methodology for your software, but also what happens if it gets related to another piece of software. The cool thing about the way that the charm store works is it allows you to build layers. And so if you've got a piece of software that's dependent on another piece of software, hopefully someone's already gone and written a layer for that piece of software, and you can just extend what's already there. And, I think back to non-Kubernetes charms, but if you took building a Hadoop application, for example, you can use a Hadoop layer that already deploys all your Hadoop applications. You've just got to deal with the bit that you want to be able to deploy on top of it. And so, using layers allows you to build out and not have to, duplicate code that already exists. It does it for you. And then you can just carry on building your application layer out. If I then have a look at some code that I wrote earlier. So we're inside IntelliJ here. This happens to be my IDE of choice. You could use anything. You're not constrained by your IDE. You can see that there's a few files that have already been generated. So we're looking at something that I've already built. I'm not going to code on the fly. I'll do that in another blog. But you can see here you've got a README, a metadata YAML, a layer YAML, config YAML, and then ignore the test folder. We have the reactive folder itself. And so reactive is where most of the coding happens. And the other YAML files at the top level are the bits and pieces that sort of hold it all together or tell it what to relate to, that type of thing. So if I open up the metadata YAML, it's very simple, very straightforward. Most of the charms that you write will follow exactly the same pattern. There's very little that you ever do differently. It's got the name, summary, who maintains it, the description, various tags, which are tags that you have to follow so that it buckets stuff correctly inside of the charm store. And then you've got the series. And of course, the series for the stuff that we're doing is Kubernetes. So you've got Kubernetes listed there. And then you've got requires. And now requires is a terribly named relation. I don't know why it's called requires, but it means that you can connect a MySQL database to this charm, and the charm will know what to do with it. The other flip side of that relation is also provides. So on the MySQL end, it would provide a MySQL relation that, you know, exposes MySQL to the rest of the world. And then on the requires end, it means that you can optionally, this is the thing, it's not a rule. You don't have to have a MySQL charm attached to it, but requires means that it will allow you to hook up a charm and then, you know, potentially do something with that relation, create a database, get some user accounts, set up a local JDBC collection, that type of thing. You can all do that with the MySQL relation in this example. Then you've got resources. The resources is Seku image, and that is the image, the Docker image that you're going to deploy. In this case, it is called Seku image. It could be called anything you want, but when you deploy the charm, as we'll look at it later, you'll see that Seku image is the resource name that we call it. And then we've got, these are Kubernetes specific. So in this case, I want to have a stateless deployment and I want to have a load balancer service type. They allow me to, similar how you would in a Kubernetes deployment, define what the end goal sort of looks like. You can obviously have stateful or stateless. You can have volumes and data points attached. You can have load balancers. You can have cluster IPs, all that type of stuff. That's the metadata YAML. Next, we're going to have a quick look at the layer YAML. And this basically tells it what layers to include. Now, of course, you have to include stuff that is Kubernetes ready for different layers. They have to be able to work with the stuff that you're doing. And so in this case, we've got Kasbase, which is container as a service. And then we've got Docker resource, which of course tells the charm to use a Docker file as a resource and how to deploy that and how to suck it up with the relation and all that type of thing. Then we've got an interface. And now the interfaces don't have to be Kubernetes specific. They can be just a interface that works anywhere. And the cool thing is, you know, if you can use a generic interface that's not Kubernetes specific, it means that you can then connect to stuff that's outside of Kubernetes. It makes sense, right? Doesn't it? So this is the generic MySQL relation. It'll work both inside and outside of Kubernetes and will just allow you to suck up metadata from that relation to create a database on the MySQL side, accept credentials for that database and a database name and its location and all that type of stuff on the client side. You know, so if you're creating an application like WordPress, it could create a WordPress database and then tell you the credentials for it. It's that type of thing. Inside the config YAML, we've got one config option, which is literally the HTTP port. You can, of course, configure as much or as little as you like. The more configuration you have, the easier it is to tweak once you've deployed it. Cool thing is about the configuration is this is sort of like the config stuff that you stick into your tiller config files when you're doing Helm deployments. But instead of having to port it around and get stuff out of version control, that type of stuff, you build it into the charm. And then when you're ready, you just deploy the charm and then you can configure this stuff on the fly. You don't have to carry around a YAML file. Of course, you can deploy a YAML file with the charm when you're deploying it. I tend not to, unless, of course, I have some preset configs that override the existing stuff. It's my charm, so I should probably set the configs right. So, into the nuts and bolts of it, if I open up Seku K8s, this is the entire deployment for my Seku charm currently. Currently, it doesn't actually do anything to MySQL relation. It will do eventually, but currently it just has it there just so I can build it out. But this basic, 59 lines of Python code allows me to deploy my Docker container to Kubernetes. It allows me to ensure that everything is configured correctly. It will do that all for me without me having to create a Kubernetes file. Now, of course, you'll say this is very simple. Why can't I just use a Kubernetes deployment file? Of course I can. And most of the time, for very small things, I probably would, because you can just, create a 15-line Kubernetes definition, deploy that, and away you go. But like I said, for relations, for deploying and connecting to stuff outside, Kubernetes definitions are not particularly scalable. They involve an awful lot of stuff that you potentially have to reasonably hard code or design your containers in a way that can dynamically look up the extra services that need to be made available for it. And, hold on, ambulance. Okay. So, you know, this is a very simplistic idea. They will clearly get more complex, as will this one, as I start building out different database backends and stuff. You know, I want to be able to connect Seku to different data sources and have it be able to sort itself out and figure out what it's doing. And then, you know, you can bring up the whole lot and it's already ready to go. Users don't have to create data sources, all that type of thing. So that will come. But we're going to have a quick look at the way that these reactive charms work. And this works the same way in cloud-based charms as it does in reactive charms for Kubernetes. There's just a couple of tweaks to deploy Docker containers, that type of thing. So at the top, you've got when not layer.docker-resource Seku image.fetched, which is a bit of a mouthful, I agree. But it should also be reasonably self-explanatory. You can read these things pretty well. And it obviously says when the Seku image is not fetched, when the Docker image that we have defined is not fetched, fetch it. So layer.docker_resource.fetch Seku image. That layer Docker that we looked at in the layer.yaml understands how to deal with this. I have no idea what it does. I know it goes and logs into a Canonical Docker repo somewhere and downloads the stuff. But, you know, literally I have to write one line, which is nice, and goes and fetches it from the repository. I don't have to deal with authentication. It's private, all that type of stuff. So that's a good start. Then the next line down, you can see I've copied some of this stuff from elsewhere and haven't renamed the functions. We've got when Seku.configured, it sets the status to active. That's a charm thing. The status, it can be a few different states, like maintenance, active, error, all that type of stuff. And of course, you can set a message with it as well, which is currently empty. But status set. Then we've got a hook flag, which is upgrade charm. So if I do charm, try that again. When I do Juju upgrade charm, which is something that allows you to obviously flip from one version of your charm deployment to the next, it will clear the config flag in this case, Seku.configured flag. And then next time that the charm tools run, the hooks run, it'll realize it's not configured and has to go through the whole process again, which is a good, easy way of just being able to get your charm to update itself and the underlying configs and the Docker image and all that type of stuff. Then we've got when layer.docker-resource.seku_image.available. Again, another mouthful, but it should be very self-explanatory. So when the Seku image is available, config MariaDB. Of course, you don't config MariaDB, you config Seku. And so we set the status, and you can see we set the status to maintenance and configuring Seku controller, which is a good start. Then we set the spec to the pod spec. So you see the last function that's in this reactive template is we've got a YAML file that it opens. It then creates this specification from it, which is a bit like a Docker Kubernetes deployment, but not. It's got a whole bunch of other bits and pieces that you can put in there as well. It then takes the configuration that you've defined in config.yaml, which could be a whole bunch of extra stuff or completely different stuff, gets the Docker image, creates the pod spec, which effectively Juju doing the whole Kubernetes deployment templating for you, and then returns that information back to the function before. So we make pod spec. I've got a log line in just to check it, just prints it out to the logs at the moment to make sure I don't break anything. Then it sets a the pod spec, and then sets the flag configured. That is it. It will, from this point onwards, deploy Seku in this case to Kubernetes without me doing anything else. I can obviously repeat this time again all over the place. If I have a look at the spec template. So again, it's another YAML file, but it's a little different to a normal Kubernetes deployment, but takes an awful lot of the same stuff as well. There's some documentation on the forums and elsewhere that obviously explain what keys can go in here. This is the simplest of simple ones, and so it has the image path, username, password. They are all supplied by the Charm store. You do not have to touch it, do anything. It just magically works. Just leave them as it is. And then the port is, if I go back to here, you can see down here in the data block, I've told it to create a config option called port, which has the HTTP port config variable set in it, which in our case by default is 8080, but you could run it on something else in my Docker container. And that's that. So next we're going to have a quick look at how to deploy this, why it's cool, how it allows you to scale, all that type of stuff. And for that, we're going to have to log in to our Kubernetes cluster and going to have a poke around. So we're going to have a look at how to deploy the Seku Charm. But first of all, of course, we have to be able to build it, get it into the Charm store, get it into Charm store for public or private consumption. It doesn't have to be public. You can deploy stuff to the Charm store and leave it purely for yourself, for your group, or obviously open it up to the wider world to allow your community members access to it, to allow other people to collaborate with you. You know, it's a good thing to be able to open this stuff out, just because then other people can obviously contribute to your charms at the same time. So I use a Mac. On Mac, there is an older version of Charm tools available, but I quite like to run the latest and greatest. And so I run another tool from Canonical called Multipass that allows me to create very lightweight Ubuntu VMs and connect external projects into that virtual machine to allow me to, build stuff quickly and easily without having to move files around and all that type of thing. So I'm inside my Multipass terminal here. I've CD'd into my project directory. You can see it's exactly the same as the layout outside, of course, because it's the same folder, it's just inside a VM. If I do charm build, what that does is it goes to the internet and downloads the latest copies of all the layers that I've stipulated. You'll see that it's got a bunch of proofreading warnings where it's linted and I've been too lazy to fix it. And it will also tell you where it's building it to. So that will go away and it will download everything it needs, package it up and stick it into a folder ready for pushing to the Charm store. Once it's built, I then need to obviously push it to the Charm store. So I can do Charm push, and then you take the path where it's built the output to, so the destination Charm directory, and then you tell it what namespace you want it to be in. So in our case, it's squiggle spicule charms, and then / Seku K8s. And so that will go and push the latest changes. So of course, there are no changes, but it will push it up there. I can then attach my Docker image to it. And then I can just decide whether to release it onto the Edge branch, the beta branch, into candidate, or obviously into stable for general availability. So it allows you to obviously go through a release process with your charms to make sure that people who are using a stable version don't accidentally get walloped with an upgrade that's not ready for consumption, that type of thing. And people can also stipulate which version they want to deploy. So in this case, we've got -2. As you push more, of course, that number will increment until whenever. And you can release different versions. You can obviously take back different versions if you release something that's got problems. You can, do all this type of stuff with your charms themselves. So with that push to the Charm store, I'm now going to bootstrap a new controller just for this demo to show you how it works. I've already added a Kubernetes cloud to my OpenStack infrastructure. And so the Kubernetes cloud already exists. Juju knows about it. I can probably show you if I do Juju list clouds. So you can see there we've got internal K8s and K8s test cloud and a few other bits and pieces. These are, bits and pieces that I've added that Juju then knows how to go and deploy against. So if I do Bootstrap, and I want to bootstrap it on my internal K8s cluster, and I'm going to call it like the Seku demo K8s cluster. And so Juju will go away and then bootstrap, just like you do with Helm. It creates the different pods that maintain the Helm deployment. This basically does the same thing, but for Juju. It will download the controller, it'll download other resources, it will stand them up, it will configure them in its own private namespace, ready for deployment of your own charms. So we'll give it a few minutes. When we come back, it'll be ready to go, and we will give Seku a go. All right, so that took about 5 minutes. My hardware isn't the fastest, the internet connection isn't the fastest, but it would probably be a bit quicker in larger data centers. Doesn't matter, it's up and running. So you can see that it's been through a few steps, and then it's verified the controller's available to make sure that everything should be up and running. So the bootstrap is complete, and we can now do like Juju status. And you can see that, we've got a very empty controller at the moment. So I'm going to do Juju add model Seku demo. Now, the cool thing about models is that they can be permissioned as well. So you can deploy models that are available for, everybody. You can deploy models available just for yourself, share them with groups, all that type of stuff. It is pretty flexible, and will allow you to segment your Kubernetes cluster or your AWS deployments or whatever, in a nice sort of organized manner. So this one says it's added the Seku demo model on the region 1 internal K8s cluster. Metadata you don't really need to know. But if I do status this time, it'll say model admin Seku demo is empty, which is exactly what we want to see. So now I'm going to have a look at how simple it is to be able to deploy a Kubernetes charm to my cluster with minimal effort. So if I go back here and then do jujucharms.com. I can probably remember this, but I'm going to make sure I get it right. So if I look at Seku K8s. Now, what you can do when you're back here in the charm store is you can see Juju deploy, and then up at the top it'll give you a stanza as to what you actually want to deploy. So I'm going to copy that out, and then I'm going to paste it directly into my terminal. So, simple Juju deploy Spickle Charms. If you just wanted the latest version, you can take off the -1. It will just deploy whatever's latest, or you can deploy it with a fixed version, which means obviously whenever you deploy that model going forward, that charm going forward into whatever model, you will always get version 1 or version 2 or version 100 or, whatever's been built. So I'm going to deploy that, and it wants some user details off me. So bear with me 1 second whilst it logs into the charm store. Can't read some stuff on my screen. Need better glasses. Or any glasses, or just a different screen, or just have it not open a browser. That'd be nice. There we go. So quit out of that. Open up this tab so it logs in. There we go. So yeah, if it tries to open a browser, just quit out the browser, and it will give you a URL to open, which you can then open on any PC as long as you're logged into the Charm store, and it will do it all magically for you, just like that. So it says then deploying Charm. So if I do Juju status, so the other cool thing about the Kubernetes deployments that I've deployed onto OpenStack is just like in the public cloud, the Kubernetes that you deploy using the charms allows you to hook in like Ceph backing stores into OpenStack so that you can deal with volume claims and that type of stuff all by itself. And so you can see how it's going through the initialization status here. So if I do watch color, Juju status, color. So it will spin up a couple of pods. It won't just spin up your own thing. It will spin up a Seku pod. It will also spin up a Seku controller. It will deploy a service for you, all that type of stuff. And so it will take a few minutes because it's going to download my container to whatever node it's deployed it on. It may already be there, in which case it'll be quick and simple. If it's got to download it, it might take a little bit longer. The other thing you can do as well is if you do Juju debug log, you can see exactly what the container is trying to print out, what it's trying to do. And so as it's going through its initialization process and standing stuff up, you can make sure that your container is configuring itself properly, is setting up all the relations and that type of stuff. If there's some issues, it will log it here, and you can just make sure that everything is working as you see fit. So this terminal should also have kubectl installed, if I can spell correctly. So you can see the different namespaces here, and then if I do kubectl -n seku demo get pods, you can see how it's bringing stuff to life. This is just normal Kubernetes stuff at this point, but I can do logs, which is exactly the same logs as you see in the get logs, the log output for Juju. And then obviously if I go back here, I can still do a sort of describe pod. You can see that it's pulling the image, it's downloading stuff to the Kubernetes client. It's then going to deploy the container onto that node and then hopefully spin it all up. The other thing that you can do as well is kubectl -n seku demo get services. So you can also see, because I asked for a load balancer type of service, it's created a load balancer service for me. The cool thing again about OpenStack is that you can use ambulance. You can use the load balancers in OpenStack to create IP addressable entry points into your Kubernetes cluster, which I love for private cloud deployments. It makes my life so much easier. So once the service is available, of course, I can then, from anywhere inside my VPN, go and get access to it. So that's pulling the container. Once the container's down, the status will flip to active. It'll be ready to go. It's still allocating, so it's going to take some time. I'm going to leave it there. Once it's up and running, I can then go and see Seku inside my Kubernetes cluster. The same stuff happens across the board. Once your container is up and running, if you want to have more, you can do like Juju add unit, and then specify your application name. That will allow you to scale your Kubernetes containers exponentially. You can also do Juju remove application to delete the containers from your cluster to pretend they never existed. You can do Juju add relation. Oh, I can show you that one actually. So for this, just to show how relations work, I'm going to do Juju deploy charmed OSM MariaDB Kate 21 and deploy that. I'm not going to let it all come to life unless, of course, it's magically quick. What that will do is obviously deploy a MariaDB instance to my model. So if I do Juju status, you can again see that it's bringing up another instance. It says blocked. It's not really blocked. It's just sorting out a persistent volume claim. Once that comes to life, it will come to life. What I can do in the meantime is Juju add relation, can't spell, MariaDB Kates and Seku-Kates. And again, what that's done is created relations between the two applications. And so when they come to life, if there's hooks involved that tell the different applications to do stuff, like create a database on the MariaDB side, it will go and do so. And you can do all this, asynchronously. You don't have to wait for everything to come to life. So you can script all this stuff up. You can have predetermined models. So if you built something that you like and you want to be able to reuse or put somewhere else or do something differently with it, you can export that model. You can save it to a file. You can deploy it to the Charm store. You can, again, deploy an entire model, like Kubernetes model of, as many pods as you could, want with one command. So Juju deploy my amazing bundle, and all these Kubernetes pods would come to life. So the final step here, you can see I've done Juju status, and both the pods have spun up. There's MariaDB and Seku-Kates. They've got IP addresses against the load balancer, which means they're obviously externally accessible. If I do get services, you can see that the external IP for Seku-Kates is listed there, so that I can get access to it from my business. Then I can also go to get pods, and I can see that you've really got 4 pods running, which are the operators and the main charms themselves, but it's all up and running. So there's an awful lot that you can do with the Kubernetes charms. They're very flexible. You can see how you can deploy stuff easily to your cluster. And you don't have to carry around all these bits and pieces with you. It's succinct, it's quick, it's easy. I love it. So if you want to check it out, there's an awful lot of documentation kicking around. It's appearing on jujucharms.com and jazz.ai. There's an awful lot of stuff on the forums as well, which is discourse.jujucharms.com. Discourse. And so when that all sort of solidifies and when all this stuff becomes, generally, well, it is generally available, but when it becomes more hardened through testing and improvements and stuff, this is absolutely the way to be able to deploy software at scale inside of Kubernetes, and then also be able to attach all this stuff to external applications. So I will leave it there. I thank you all for watching. Hopefully it's been interesting. If you want to know more, feel free to drop comments into the box below. Again, like I said, you can go and ask questions on the discourse forums for Juju Charms. They will help you out. There's also the IRC channel on Freenode, which is Juju Charms. Yes, tune in and we'll go through some more stuff very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.